Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I serve as the lead learner of the South Carolina Education Association's Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves COOL, and you can find out more about what we do at COOL at cool.us. All the work that we're doing and all the work that our COOL content creators do and that Dr. Marcella Weinsnatter and our COOL coaches do, all of that is housed on the website at cool.us, and you'll find tonight's live stream in a few days on that website as well. So I want to encourage everybody. There's so many resources, trauma-informed education resources, yoga resources, mindfulness resources, nutrition resources, banned book resources. I mean, just all kinds of really cool videos made by members of the SCEA, nutrition stuff. Just a host of great resources. So please head on over to cool.us and check that out. Well, tonight is a very important conversation, I believe. We have a bill being debated in the at the State House. It is House Bill 4624, and I'm going to put the link to it. I'm going to put it in the comments so you guys can check out the bill as it is written. It is a bill on gender-affirming care, but it also has language in it that educators really need to pay attention to. Not only is it about the type of care that transgender students might need, but it also has stipulations in it about educators being required to notify parents and to force the outing of students who they suspect is having gender dysphoria. That is something that will have huge impacts on educators, and it's something we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be well informed about this. According to an article from Scientific American, the truth is that more than a dozen studies of more than 30,000 transgender and gender diverse young people consistently show that access to gender-affirming care is associated with better mental health outcomes, and that lack of access to such care is associated with higher rates of suicide, depression, and self-harming behavior. Major medical organizations, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the Endocrine Society, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Psychiatric Association have all published policy statements and guidelines on how to provide age-appropriate, gender-affirming care. All of those medical societies find such care to be evidence-based and medically necessary. Now, I would ask you, those are the experts. They've been doing the research on this issue. And we have politicians who have particular religious and philosophical viewpoints who are trying to force their religion and their philosophy onto people through a law like H4624. And the question I have for the people of South Carolina is, what are we going to do? Are we going to listen to people who have a right to their political, philosophical, and religious opinions? Are we going to allow them to dictate to the rest of us what our views should be when they are in conflict with these major medical organizations who are actually tasked with and spend their lives researching whether or not this is appropriate and evidence-based or not? And, you know, for me and my family, I don't like the idea of the government telling me what's right for my family and me, and stripping me from having the autonomy to make those kind of decisions for my child, especially when we know that those decisions could lead to better mental health outcomes and the prevention of things like suicide, depression, and other awful things. So what I thought we would do is bring on somebody tonight who would be directly impacted by this law. Her name is Jessicka Spearman, and she's a dedicated advocate and leader in Anderson County right here in South Carolina. She's currently serving as the president of PFLAG in Anderson. She works to support and uplift the LGBTQIA plus community and their families. She has a background as a licensed professional counselor associate and brings invaluable expertise to her role, offering compassionate guidance and support to those in need. She's the mother of 4, including a trans child, and others within the LGBTQIA community. She intimately understands the joys and challenges faced by families navigating issues of identity and acceptance. Her personal experiences fuel her commitment to creating inclusive and accepting communities where all individuals can thrive. She was born and raised in Anderson County. She's deeply rooted in her community. And without further ado, let's bring her on. Jessicka, thank you for your time tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I am a little frustrated at some of the things that are happening in Columbia and around the state that, to me, I see as very hurtful to people that too many times are marginalized in our communities, in our society. And instead of supporting these people and showing compassion and love, we have people doing things that, to me, are detrimental to them. And I want to lend my voice and platform people that can help us change the narratives around that. So welcome tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Let's start off with, you and I talked a little bit beforehand, and I like to lead with something positive. So talk about some positive things that have happened in your life and for your child's life and in your community and your schools that have helped create a supportive environment for you and your children.
I will say this journey has been many years in the making with having a trans child. We had the best teachers for my kid ever since elementary school. I mean, I couldn't have asked for better principals that were understanding, better librarians, better teachers. Like, we really have had the support there. We have the support there now. And I don't think everyone gets to have that experience like we did. We really have had our community come together for us and back us up, taking care of our kid.
It's so important. I have a son who's gay, and he is now pursuing his PhD at UTEP, and we've had a great experience here in Horry County. He had a wonderful school experience, very supportive of educators that helped him achieve his greatest potential and even more. And he had a wonderful experience in a very welcoming environment. And I think, that's what all students across the state and country deserve, is a welcoming environment. Let's talk a little bit about this bill that's being talked about. And you told me that there's going to be a public hearing tomorrow on H4624. Talk a little bit about how you feel about this bill and your concerns around it.
There are so many concerns in this bill. I think the number one for me is ending medical interventions. There are no surgeries. I will say, just like Dr. Mack says, there are no medical interventions surgical interventions going on in South Carolina. That's not something that we have to worry about. But as far as puberty blockers and as far as any other kind of medical treatments, ending those quickly will do detrimental damage to a child. I mean, we have children that have been on these medications for years. And just like with any medication, you don't need to stop very quickly. You need to continue until, either titrate it off or, whatever is deemed necessary. But most of the time that doesn't happen, and the children still stay on these medications. There's also in this bill language that is ambiguous on purpose to impede mental health treatment. It says we cannot provide gender affirming care as therapists. Well, define gender affirming care for me? What is their definition? Is it just the surgical? Is it just the medical part of it? But you're including that in with the mental health care. So, and it almost sounds like that's all they want is the mental health treatment. But are they wanting us to do, send them for mental health treatment and not still be trans, which is not the way that it works.
Right, like almost like a conversion therapy kind of thing.
Right.
Which
is unethical.
They don't reinforce your identity as a trans human.
Right. And that's unethical for therapists, especially licensed ones. So it's not something that's going to be able to happen. And working within that field too, you know, there are so many negative narratives that are going on right now about trans healthcare in general. I will say, as a parent of a trans kid, and, you know, I also have 2 other children that are within the rainbow continuum. So this is not just a singular experience for us, but, you know, having a trans child, the easiest thing I can do is raise my trans child, but trying to work around, you know, having therapy that will be effective, having books that they can read that are normative and display those images of them. I think those are kind of some of the most important things. And, you know, in this, there's an unfortunate portion of it that says that, you know, educators would have to out children to their parents if they are suspected of being trans. That language is so terrifying to me. Having such support from our educational system. And I mean, my kids have been in the same school since K4. So every teacher in this district knows who I am. I went to the sister school and graduated from the sister school from here. My kids go to the other high school in our district. And, you know, teachers from both districts or both schools know who I am. Everyone at the school board knows who I am. So, you know, having to feel like we are going to out a trans child, well, what are you outing? I mean, if a male child paints his fingernails, is that enough to out a child? If you wear something that is not the, you know, the stereotypical female dress, is that going to be an intervention that a teacher has to deal with or have a conversation with a parent? And it doesn't even say in this bill who will have to talk to the parent. So that's an uncomfortable conversation to have when you don't exactly know, you know, unless you live in the world that I live in where the DSM-5 TR is, you know, on your desk.
Right.
Do we know what the symptomology of gender dysphoria is? You know, do we know what a trans child is? Have they told you? Or are you just making assumptions? Because I know when with my kid, the first question I always get asked is, how did your kid come out to you? They never had to come out. We knew. I mean, I've been waiting just for the confirmation their entire life. So, you know, there's no grand coming out story because we already knew. But the next part was, well, how does this affect the mental health and stuff like that? So if a teacher has to out a child, the detriment that could happen, because everyone in South Carolina knows not every home is safe.
That's right.
Now, my child was able to come out. Well, multiple of my children were able to come out, but my trans child was able to come out and say, these are the things that I want to happen with my body. This is what the way that I want to look. So if your child isn't already telling you that, then there's an issue there. So are we going to send these children home with the assumption that there is a trans kid or, you know, not non-binary people exist, gender fluid, there's gender non-conforming? What exactly are we outing? And are we sure that we're outing the right thing? And are we just putting these children in danger?
Well, that's the thing that as an educator that concerns me the most is the idea that you have a student who is struggling and who wants to come out to a trusted adult and does not feel safe doing that at home, feels that there's going to be some type of being ostracized or like kicked out of the house, or potentially hurt, and they, you know, mention something to a teacher that they feel they can trust, and then that trust is then immediately has to be violated, and you go to the very people that they don't want that information going to. And I can understand as a parent wanting to know that information about your child, but like you said, for my child, my son came out when he was about 6th grade. and I allowed him to come out to me and in the time and place of his choosing, I didn't put the onus on the school to figure that
Right.
information out and then get it to me. My job as a parent is to know my child well enough and to create a relationship of trust where they would come to me first. They would want to come to me first.
Right.
And I think the problem is you have some people out there who absolutely do not accept that in their children, would not accept that identity in their children. And that's where the issue in my view lies.
Yeah, I mean, it is not a path that I think any child like chooses. This is a difficult path. Right now, we are watching the South Carolina legislators bully trans children, which is something that we talk about in school to not bully others. We have entire hotlines set up, but we're watching our state legislators bully our children. And kids can feel that harm. You know, I know my child is my child, so they see all of the advocacy work I do. They're in the know. They see when I'm not in a good mood because I'm anxious about bills going through and stuff like that. So they will ask, you know, what's going on with this? And they get to see, you know, just raw emotion from me. And I think that, you know, I think it's important for them to continue those journeys, even though that might not be something that we necessarily agree with, you know. And in talking with some of the other parents of trans kids, you know, we form our communities, and, you know, other parents are, you know, even the thought process of, if this happens in schools, trans kids are going to start being absent from school. How's that going to affect their graduation rate? How's that going to affect their education? You know, my child is a teenager, and it's going to be in a year, we're looking at colleges. Well, the college that they really wanted to go to is in Tennessee. Right now, there are some laws on their books that, for all intents and purposes, my child could go to jail for dressing the way that they want to dress. So, you know, education is a huge component in this. You know, if we're not feeling safe in our schools because our legislators are saying you have to out all these children are not going to come to school.
Right. I want to let's for a moment grant the proponents of H4624 all of the benefits of the doubt and say that they have a positive intent, that they are genuinely concerned for kids and genuinely concerned that their kids might somehow be hurt by these interventions, by this type of gender affirming care. Where do you think this comes from? Where do you think their notions and ideas around this issue stem from?
If I had to think of it in a positive way, I would say that they're just misunderstanding what exactly goes on. You know, with the advocacy that I do, I get a ton of public feedback. So it's always like, you know, you're cutting off certain appendages of your child. And I'm like, no, like, my kid's not old enough for any of that. And that comes years later down the road, after a lot of therapy, a lot of other interventions before there is surgical intervention. So, but I do know that they know that this isn't happening. You know, I know that they've talked to us, and they still, that's the unfortunate part, I think, is I wish that I could give them the benefit of the doubt at this point.
Yeah. It feels like they think that parents and young people are making this decision like as simply as they would say, hey, let's just change your hair color and see how that's like. Like, there's not really a whole lot of really careful thought and sort of conferring with medical professionals about what precisely should be done. That this is just something that you wake up one day and say, hey, let's try this. You know, like, can you help dispel what maybe some people are thinking in terms of these kind of decisions that families face? Like, what goes into that that decision-making process?
Well, and I will tell you, like I said earlier, this has been years in the making. I've known for all purposes that this was the way my child was from about 2 years old. My child is about to be 16, and we just have started like the medical intervention part of it. So these decisions take time. They take intense consideration. You know, you don't start off going and being like, give me all the medicine that you can, or give me all those medical interventions. You know, the first component for me, of course, as a therapist, was getting a therapist for my kid, one that my kid could talk openly with, even if legislation went through that would ban them from getting the care in South Carolina. So we had to seek outside the state for appropriate mental health care treatment. And, you know, but this has been years in the making. This is not something that his dad and I have taken lightly. This is something that's taken a lot of thought and a lot of effort. And you know what? There's no single journey that's identical. Every child that I've met, every family that I've met, we're all on separate journeys because it is individualized healthcare.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I think one of the things that we're having to overcome is, you know, I'm 50, I just turned 53. And I remember, you know, this whole idea of being transgender, or even going back to like drag, like when you watched MASH, and, you know, Klinger were dressed up like a woman, and that was considered, he was trying to get out of, you know, kicked out of the army. And it was a joke, like bosom buddies and stuff. All this stuff was kind of a joke. And I know that drag is different from being trans, but I'm saying, like, we grew up with a context where this kind of thing, this wasn't really taken seriously by the mainstream. It was made a joke. And I think now people in you know, Generation X and older are having to sort of confront these sort of implicit biases that we grew up with around this whole issue, and try to understand it from a scientific and medical perspective, but also a sociological perspective, that things are changed, that trans people have always existed. It's just that we just haven't always had a society that allowed them to live freely in that identity. And it's concerning to me that people can't see through that and can't just sort of take a stock in their own biases and try to be more understanding and compassionate. So what would be your recommendation for people who are trying to advocate for transgender people, not just students, but human beings, teachers who are transgender? What can we do to be better advocates and get through to some of these people who have those biases and mindsets kind of stuck in place?
Have conversations. In conversations that you can hold without becoming emotionally reactive. This is very deeply, I mean, it's deeply personal. You cannot get any more personal than my own child. But there are times when I have to go to the bank and I have to use, like, I work in a very small conservative community, and I'll, you know, hand them my information for the bank, and it's PFLAG, and they're like, oh, what's PFLAG? And I have those conversations with people, and I will tell you that I have had the most positive feedback. And it's always like, oh, hey, I know someone that either their child is, someone within our, you know, within our family, that I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand any of this. And I didn't understand that there was like a lot of hate that's coming towards these children. And, you know, and they'll misgender the kids in the conversation. I just lightly say, well, I think they go by he now or her. And these conversations can happen so organically too, that it's almost terrifying for me. I'm always having these conversations everywhere I go, just to breed that understanding. You know, as far as history and stuff like that, I had a trans aunt who transitioned in 1992 in one of the most rural parts of Anderson County. And I believe that was one of the most phenomenal experiences I could have ever had, was to have, a family member. And everyone in my family loved my aunt. Like, that was the most cohesive person in our family. And when she passed away, the family kind of fell apart afterwards. And so families have had these things, and sometimes people will hide them, but the conversations need to happen. We don't hide anything, in our household. We don't hide stuff about our family and details about our family. And I'm probably irritate people a lot because I do talk so much about it, because I'm super passionate about it, because this is my child's life. This is their future.
I think there's, Jessicka, one thing that I've noticed, and please feel free to push back on this, but I think there are some people that sometimes that actually are trying to be compassionate and are well-intended and maybe misgender unintentionally, and they're trying to figure this out. And again, there might be a 68-year-old person who's just, this has just not been a part of their worldview. It's not been part of what they've grown up with. But they're trying to understand, and then sometimes they get kind of their hands slapped, and then I feel like then they don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't find that helpful. I think it's really helpful to be compassionate about it, like staking out those boundaries and affirming, pronouns that you want to be called and things like that. But I think we have to be careful. Sometimes I think we actually make enemies when we could be making allies. Do you see that at all, Jessicka, happening?
I will say, in my personal opinion, like, I don't have that much of a personal context for it. I mess up all the time. I told you before we started, like, there are times when I will use an incorrect pronoun for my child, because our pronoun progression went very quickly from she, her, they, them, he, him, almost within like 2 months. So I will mess up. Now, I will tell you what my kid tells me, that they do give gentle reminders after they have informed somebody, and they don't even say, like, you use the wrong pronouns. They'll be like, hey, I'm a dude. And that kind of spurs a little more. I think the response, though, sometimes is we take it really personal. And I will say I've been there and done that. I've been, been open to being corrected and then made it about me. And, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did that. I know. And just, because you get embarrassed and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm an ally and I should know better and do better, but it's not about me. And that's the part that we have to be so conscious of is it's not about me. Do I think that, I think the difference can be heard, if you're genuinely doing it because you've had a relationship with someone, some kind of interpersonal relationship, whether they be your friend or your colleague, and you misgender them because you've known them previously. Okay. That's one thing. But when it's this continued misgendering, that's the thing that's hurtful. Does it take practice? Absolutely. Does it take, having reminders sometimes? Yeah. But I do and I see that too. People are like, I don't like those pronouns. And I'm like, well, you use pronouns all the time.
Yeah. Right.
Got to get used to what we're talking about.
That's right. You mentioned earlier books, and I think that's a really important issue as well that's related to this. I was speaking to a media specialist at a school, and he told me that, when they do this blanket thing where they say, well, if it has a trans character, we're going to put it in the restricted section, or we're going to, just completely remove it altogether. And then I have a trans student come in and say, hey, I'm looking for this book and I can't find it on the shelf. And they say, well, it's in the restricted section. What does that say to that child about their identity, that their identity is something that has to be hidden and restricted or put in a special place? Talk about the importance of books with LGBTQIA plus characters being available to our students, not only for those students who identify that way, but even for straight students, or that should be reading about the experiences of people that are going through life in a different way from themselves, so that they can be empathetic and understand the world around them better.
I think that that's the most important part, and something that I emphasize the most is being developing empathy, because we're not born with empathy inherently. It has to be developed. Would I be the same person today if I had not grown up with a trans aunt? Would I be the same person today if I had not raised a trans child? We don't know, but that deeply affected the empathy that I have for the community. So when you read and know people or develop a connection with a character in a book, it breeds that connectivity. And I think that that's what we're missing right now, because we are, for all intents and purposes, we are shaming trans children.
Yeah.
We are pushing them out and saying who you are and what you're doing is not okay. And it shouldn't be in the public. It shouldn't be in the limelight. When my child just wants to live their life and be a kid. And that's the way that it's always been. Like, you know, there's been a lot of focus on it so much lately. And my kid's like, I just really want to be a kid. Like, I want to have all the typical experiences that a teenager has. But we always have to like take safety into consideration. And, you know, it's not the typical teenage experience any longer.
Yeah. And these people who talk about, well, we shouldn't sexualize. I'm like, we read Romeo and Juliet. We read, you know, about Oedipus. Like, I mean, well, there's a, it's just there. This is, the logic isn't there, because what they're really saying is we shouldn't be teaching something outside the bounds of heteronormative concepts. Like anything that falls out of that is what we're saying when we shouldn't sexualize children. And of course, there's a difference between, you know, sexualizing and like Romeo and Juliet. There's a romance there. Like there's clearly a romantic, you know, interest in each other. To have characters who have romantic interests in each other isn't necessarily isn't pornographic. And that's the other thing, is conflating. Anytime we talk about the human sexuality with pornography, is really actually creating a really super unhealthy environment for young people around the concept of sex, because whenever you conflate it with something dirty or pornographic, then it's like you don't have a healthy concept of your own sexuality. You see it as, you see yourself as, and because every human being has sexual feelings, and if you view them as dirty, that's not a healthy thing to grow up with, that concept.
And so I only see the legislator as the people who are trying to, you know, identify those genital markers or the genitals of my child and their genetic markers. Like, why do you need to know that? You know, my child's pretty masculine looking, and that's not an issue. Like, why do you need to know what is down there? You know, and as a trauma therapist, I am the first one who will say, you know, children need to know what body parts they have. I run into that so frequently, having to explain to parents, you know, we're not going to call this, you know, any kind of euphemism. We're going to use the actual names here, because, you know, something has happened to your child, and, you know, we needed to use those appropriate names. So, you know, this is biology. The human body functions sexually at given points in times. Why are we so afraid of what the human body can and cannot do, and what it's capable of not, you know, and kids, even a kid, you know, kissing me on the cheek is not a sexualized action. Why are we making everything into a sexualized action?
Yeah, no, it's, you know, and it's like South Carolina has the 11th highest teen birth rate in the country, you know, because we're not having these kind of conversations with young people about sexuality and creating an open atmosphere where we can have a healthy view of it, and we can talk about it fully, so that they're informed about their sexuality, not in a way that's promoting a particular ideological agenda, but just, you know, just talking about the human experience rather than trying to hide it from them. And then you wind up with the 11th highest teen birth rate in the country.
Sexual abuse rates are up there too. So that's another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Sexual assault rates, and it's just an unhealthy environment. what we're running out of time, but I wanted to just give you an opportunity to, if there's something we haven't talked about that's important that we need to bring up here, particularly as it relates to the day-to-day experience of educators in South Carolina. What can they do to support trans students and to create a better environment for all students?
Sometimes it's just listen, and it's listening to the kid, and validation does not mean that you agree with someone. Validation is just allowing them to have the thoughts and the feelings that they have, but you don't have to necessarily agree, but listening to them, and also listening in the environment to hear what other students are saying, and to make sure that we shut down those negative environments that are going on between the students. There are conversations that my child will tell me about, and I'm like, how did you even hear that? And they're like, oh, they were talking in class. So I think the most important thing is, once you have a relationship with a that student, you develop that rapport with a student to continue that. You love that child, and you are invested in their future. That's why you're an educator. And remembering that this child is a child. This is a human being. This is a person that we love and care about, and we want the best possible outcome.
Absolutely. My concern is, where does this end? Where you're telling the educator, now you've got to tell the parents if you suspect they have this gender dysphoria. Where does that end? If I suspect a student is atheist, if I suspect a student is changing their religion, if I suspect that they like a particular type of music, or, like where does that end in terms of the teacher's responsibility to inform the parent of those kind of things that students may bring to the school and want to tell an educator, or they just may observe it. It may not even be an overt conversation where the student comes up and says, hey, I wanted to let you know I'm transgender. It could just be overhearing a conversation or an interaction that the teacher interprets a certain way. And now I've got to play some kind of police role and tell the parent that I suspect this thing about the student. And it's like, I just don't know where that kind of mentality ends. And I understand parents want to know what's going on with their kids. I get that, and they're concerned. And but I feel like parents, just, if you want to know what's going on with your kids, talk with them. Develop a healthy relationship with them, one where they feel they can trust you. And if they are trans, that they can actually talk to you about it and not feel threatened.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And as far as where does it end, I'm not sure. I feel like there's so much right now that, just because someone believes a certain way or prescribes to a certain religion doesn't mean that everyone else is going to. And these are hard conversations that I've had to have with my children. We don't all have to believe just alike, but it also doesn't mean we have to hate each other.
That's right. Well, Jessicka, thank you for the work you're doing in Anderson and really across the state to be an advocate here and to speak out on this issue that affects you and your family and really affects a lot of families across South Carolina. I just appreciate you and appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Jessicka, thanks so much. That was Jessicka Spearman. I want to thank everybody. There were so many really great comments. Promise Stevens Edwards, Jessica Payne Watley. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Mel Moore, Cindy Baker, Chris Sally. So many people with some amazing comments. We really appreciate you. Appreciate Jessicka Spearman for her time tonight. And this is an important thing. This is an important conversation, and it's really important right now because they are going to be having public hearings on this bill 4624, and I'm going to go ahead and put the link to that bill again in the comments so you can read it for yourself and understand exactly what may become law here in South Carolina, affecting parents and families and young people, and also every single educator in the state of South Carolina. This law will have profound impacts on you because you will now be forced If you suspect that a student or in your building has gender dysphoria, of notifying the parents. And I think that we need to think long and hard about whether that's something we want to support, because I think it's really potentially quite destructive and a slippery slope to a lot of other terrible policies that could be put in place that really destroy the trust and the rapport that teachers build with their students. I want to promote a couple things coming up. I am super stoked about this. Diane Ravitch, who is one of the country's leading public schools advocates, is going to come on the live stream this Thursday from 7 to 8 o'clock. We're going to have a conversation about the privatization efforts and the war on public schools. I hope you'll join us for that. And please, please share the information about that. That's however you're watching tonight, that's going to be available that way on Thursday. You can always check out our Cool Beans podcast. The next episode's on February 20th at 7 o'clock. Angie Brush, Stephanie Johnson, Angelica McDonald, and Dr. Marcella Weinschneider are going to talk about our amazing Cool Coaching program. Coming up on the 28th, Audrey Calianos, she's a registered dietitian here in South Carolina. She's going to be talking about something called the Body Project, which is all about women's body image and how that can sometimes create self-esteem issues. So if you are interested in that, that's going to be February 28th at 7 o'clock. We do have a second retreat that's opened up. You can go to cool.us/retreat. If you're a public educator in South Carolina, just go to cool.us/retreat. There's one space left in the June 12th through the 14th retreat. There's 9 spaces open for the one we just opened up in the 26th to the 28th of June in Old Fort, North Carolina. Also want to mention the Trauma-Informed Education Workshop taking place July 11th from 10 to 3 at the SCEA headquarters. That is free for members of the SCEA, $40 for non-members. And then this is something we're just releasing information on today. Save the date for our Educator Health and Wellness Day. We are collaborating with the Circle of Rest by Veronica Primus and the folks at Columbia College on July 19th to offer an entire day of health and wellness for our educators. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for that. We'll have more details forthcoming. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you to Jessicka Spearman. Thank you for tuning in. I think no matter what, when I think about this issue, love is always the answer. Compassion, love and compassion are the answers. When we really dig into what policy expresses the greatest amount of love and compassion, we need to be thinking about how these laws impact sometimes the most marginalized people in our society. We know, based upon tons and tons of research by medical professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, medical professionals, people who are endocrinologists, we know that gender-affirming care can save lives, can prevent mental health issues, can prevent depression, can prevent suicide. And if we know that, and if the medical professionals are telling us that, why are we listening to politicians who are not trained in these areas? Why are we listening to politicians who have an ideology that they want to promote, a religious viewpoint that they want to promote, and put into law that prevents us from accessing the care that our children might need after careful reflection with medical professionals? And why would we also force educators to out students when we know that is potentially detrimental and potentially harmful to young people? That is not what compassion and love looks like to me. That's what fear-based thinking, superstitious-based thinking, it's what hateful, bigoted thinking looks like to me, not compassion and love. So we are going to reflect the greatest amount of love and compassion in our laws and in our public policies We need to be listening to the people who those laws are going to be impacting the most. We need to be listening to people like Jessicka Spearman, listening to trans students, listening to adults who were trans, who didn't have access to gender affirming care and the impacts that had on their lives. We need to be listening to the parents whose children committed suicide because they didn't have access to the care that they needed. We don't need to be listening to bigoted politicians who are just trying to make a point. They have a right to their opinion. They have a right to, how they want to manage themselves and how they want to talk to their families about these issues. But what they don't have a right to do is to enforce their morality and their religious views on everybody else, especially when by doing so, they cause harm. So I hope that you will join us in advocating for compassion and love in our society and have that reflected in our laws. If you are interested in being a part of our movement at the SCEA, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can go to jointhescea.org, or you can text the word join to 48744. I want you to, one last thing is to notice who's talking about this and who's not. Look at your teachers' associations in the state of South Carolina. Who is talking about these issues? Who's standing up for these issues? Who's platforming people and who's not? There's one union in the state of South Carolina. There is one association standing up for the rights of LGBTQIA plus students and educators, and that's the South Carolina Education Association. I hope that you'll stand with us. Take care. Have a great night. And Jessicka, thank you so much for your comments. We'll see you Thursday, Diane Ravitch.